Welcome everybody. So with tax season just around the corner, we thought it'd be a good opportunity to bring up some of the top things that people forget to claim on the return or don't realize that they might be able to get a deduction for or credit for. We'll start off with medical expenses. So medical expenses is something that's been around for a very long time. It is a credit that can be claimed on your return for any expenses you have related to medical purposes. Now, at first glance, a lot of people think that they don't have enough or they don't have anything that applies or qualifies as a medical expense, but keep in mind that there are a lot of things that qualify as an expense that can add up quickly and be claimed on your return. For example, anything for dental care, anything for eye care, for example, any new prescription glasses or contact lenses can be claimed, and that can add up really quick if you get a new pair or two during the year. You can also have prescription medication, physiotherapy, chiropractic therapy, a lot of different things apply. So make sure you look back at your year and see what qualifies. Now, something else that gets missed a lot of time is for anybody who is in a more rural area, if you need to travel 40 kilometers or more, then you're able to claim an expense for the travel time to go out. And you don't even need to keep receipts for fuel and gas and all that. Just keep a log of where you went, when, and the distance, and then you are able to claim a rate per kilometer based on the number of kilometers you drove out. If your travel is over 80 kilometers one way, then you're also able to claim meals for that travel. So again, if you travel 40 kilometers or more, make sure you keep a logbook of that and provide that to your tax preparer, because that'll come in handy on your tax return. Something else that gets missed often enough is premiums paid on your medical plan. If you're paying for medical coverage, make sure that you keep track of the premiums you're paying, because those can be claimed as a medical expense on top of the amounts that you pay directly for the expense itself. And so you want to claim the premiums. And if you end up having to pay for a percentage of the actual expense, for example, you have prescription medication, the plan covers the majority of it, but you have to pay out of pocket for a certain percentage, you can not only claim the premiums for the medical insurance coverage, but you can also claim the portion of the prescription that you had to pay out of pocket. So make sure to keep track of those as well, okay? And when we talk about medical expense, I've listed a whole bunch that come to mind easily, but there are many other things that you might not be aware of that qualify as a medical expense. So for that reason, we're going to put a link down below in around the comment sections to the Government of Canada website that kind of lists out all the different things that qualify as a medical expense. Just for my own curiosity before coming on, I looked at this quickly and found a couple of things that you might not consider. So for example, crutches can be claimed as medical expense. Something that I wouldn't think of would be egg and sperm freezing and storage. If you're putting that aside for having a child later on in life, that can be claimed as a medical expense according to the Government of Canada. So again, just take a look at that if you have anything that you think may or may not qualify, because that'll give you a good idea of if it does. Something else to consider is, depending on what province you are, some things are allowable in certain provinces and not in others, and vice versa. So for example, I'm in Manitoba, and in Manitoba we cannot claim massage therapy, but that is claimable in other provinces. And there's a bunch of other professionals as well that the claimability of it depends on what province you live. So if you're curious about that, again, we'll put a link down below of a Government of Canada website that outlines all the different medical practitioners and in which province they qualify as an eligible medical expense and in which province they don't. So check that out, okay? One last thing for medical expenses. You might think, well, I have little to no income, or I don't owe any taxes, so it is not worth it for me to keep track of those. That might not necessarily be true. So not only is just because you don't owe taxes, if you're getting a refund, medical expenses might be able to increase your refund. And even if you have little to no income, you may qualify for a refundable medical supplement. That's why it's always important to have a tax professional and give them all your information so they can put that in your return and see what what can help you or not. So you might be surprised, and if you have little to no income, you might qualify for a refund because of your medical expenses. Keep that in mind. Number 2, employment expenses. So something that a lot of people overlook as well is what we consider employment expenses. So employment expenses are expenses that you have to incur in the course of your employment. So the classic example is a salesman that drives around with his or her own car to go to different customers to try and sell whatever they're selling. Well, if that person is using their own vehicle and paying for the expenses for that vehicle themselves, whether it be repairs and maintenance or fuel, they're able to claim those expenses, or at least a portion of them, on their personal tax return. Same applies for certain cell phone expenses, internet potentially, and a big one is nowadays working from home. If you work from home more than 50% of the time, then you're able to claim part of your housing expenses as an employment expense on your personal return. Now, the thing to remember for this is, in order for you to claim employment expenses as an employee somewhere, you need to get your employer to sign off on a T2200. So that is a T2200. They fill that out, and it outlines what expenses you're required to incur in the course of your employment, and so that if ever you get reviewed or audited by CRA, they will be asking you for that form, and you need to be able to provide that along with the receipts for the expenses that you claimed. It also outlines if there are any payments that they made towards you to cover part of your expenses. For example, the example I gave earlier with the salesman that drives around his or her own car, if that person received a reimbursement for their employer or an allowance to cover the vehicle expense that they have, it'll be put on that T2200, and it will outline if that was included as a taxable benefit or not, which dictates how the expense itself needs to be claimed on your return. So again, these are all things that you want to make sure that if you have any expenses whatsoever that you incur for your work, look into seeing if that applies. Talk to your tax professional, look at getting a T2200, because that can make a difference on your return. Third, moving expenses. So moving expenses doesn't apply to the majority of people, but the people who does apply to, it can make a significant difference on your return. If you moved over 40 kilometers closer to a new employment or schooling, you should be able to qualify for moving expenses. Moving expenses, when I ask people if they've moved recently, and if they have, they might not think there's anything to claim because they didn't pay a mover. They just loaded everything up in their car and drove across the country or wherever their final destination is. Just because you didn't incur any expenses for it, there likely is still something that can be claimed on your return that can make a significant difference. You're able to claim an allowance for the travel if you use your own car. You're also able to claim an allowance for meals without receipts based on the number of travel days that you did have. On top of a slew of other expenses that could be claimed as well. For example, if you paid moving expenses, again, you can claim that. If you had accommodations during your move or temporarily at your new location before your house was ready, for example, that'd be something you can claim. A big one that some people don't know about is you're able to claim some of the selling and buying expenses of selling your old residence and buying a new one. So that could be real estate commissions, legal fees, and those can add up really quickly for somebody who is selling a residence as part of their move for that new employment or school. That could add up to tens of thousands and can lead to significant tax savings on your return. So if you moved over 40 kilometers, make sure you keep track of the dates you moved, where you moved, the address, your old address, your new address, and the addresses of your employers or the school that you attend to, and talk to a tax professional in terms of what applies in your situation and what you might be able to claim on your return to make sure you maximize your return. So those are the top 3 things that came to mind in terms of things that people overlook when preparing their taxes. So if any of those apply to you, make sure you talk to your professional and make sure that you claim on your return to maximize your refund. There are a wide variety of other credits or deductions that we are not covering today, especially if you have let's say a rental, or even more a self-employed business. We could spend a couple hours talking about how to maximize the refund on that. Beyond the scope of what we're talking today, again, if you are in those situations, My advice is always to get a professional, talk to him or her about your situation, and make sure that you maximize your refund for the year. So thank you for watching. See you next time.